Hi, everybody. I'm Miranda Bree, and we're here on the Cleanse, Nourish, and Transform Summit. I'm here sharing with you guys my journey of discovering that I had issues with food when I never knew I did. And today I have Dr. Melissa McCreary, and she is the author of her website, toomuchonherplate.com. And she also wrote the book, let me read that, Emotional Eating Rescue Plan for Smart, Busy Women. So, Dr. McCreary, I found your perspective on this all very interesting and insightful because I know that a lot of smart, busy women have issues with food, and yet the rest of their lives operate pretty functionally. So, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think this is so common, and it's also something that we get so stuck on. And so what I say, I work with lots of high performers. I work with lots of smart people who do amazing things in their lives. And so for many people, this feels like this one place where they can't achieve success. They've done all these other tremendous things, and they can't make it work. And the myth is that everybody else has it figured out. And the myth is that this should be really easy. And the myth is that this is really just about food, and you just need to, apply yourself and eat less, move more, right? That's the. But actually, particularly for smart, high-achieving, busy people, food is a real trap, and there's some very specialized ways that people can get caught up in cycles with food, and then with overeating, and then with emotional eating, and those things can go round and round and round and tend to snowball. And I can tell you more about that cycle if you want to dive right into that, or
yeah, go for it.
So I think that, again, so here's the other thing about people who have accomplished a lot. People who are smart, we're used to being able to figure things out, and we're used to being able to make things happen. And so when you start off with this idea that, okay, I'm going to change my eating, or I'm going to fit into those jeans in my closet, or I'm going to stop what I'm doing at night with the bowl of ice cream, it feels like I should just be able to do it, right? I should just be able to not do this thing that I'm trying to do. But the truth is, food for lots of us has become this thing that is so much more than fueling our bodies. So one of the things I do, and if people are taking notes, you might want to write this down. And I'm actually going to have you make a little drawing, and if you don't have something to write with, that's fine. But if you do, I want you to make a circle, and you can put. I'm not very good at describing what it is I want you to draw, but let's make a circle with 5 spokes on it. It's going to end up looking like a Ferris wheel or a hamster wheel, actually. And we're going to label each of these spokes, all right? So the first one is exhaustion. And then spoke next to that, let's put emotions. And then for the next spoke, how about stress? And then we can fill in being too busy. And then the last spoke, I struggled with what to call this one, but I think the best word for it is avoidance. And avoidance kind of happens because, so here's the deal. Now picture this wheel moving like a hamster wheel around and around. And think about how all these things contribute to each other. Right? Exhaustion leads to, when you have emotions, not knowing what to do with them, or they feel too big, or they feel like, oh, it's one more thing, or stress is made bigger by exhaustion and by being too busy. And avoidance really is that last piece, which is when you get this whole wheel going and all this stuff happening, not wanting to deal with one more thing. Not wanting, my website is Too Much on Her Plate, not wanting one more thing on your plate, or not feeling like you can handle it, or that you even have the energy or the bandwidth to start to think about it. So if you look at the stuff that you've written down here and this wheel, and I think you're nodding your head, and I think lots of people can relate to how when this thing gets going, they all start to you know, there's a lot of metaphors here, right? It can be a
Yeah.
chain of dominoes or a hamster wheel, but all these things build on each other. And now I want you to think about how we have learned to, in so many ways, historically from our relationships and growing up and from the culture we live in, how we've learned to use food for every single one of those things, either to help us through it or to change it or to distract ourselves from it or to somehow temporarily play with our energy so that we think we feel differently, at least in the moment, or maybe we do. So I say all that because food has become a very powerful thing in the lives of a lot of people, particularly busy high achievers. And if you look at all those things that you just wrote down on that sheet of paper or that I just described, a food plan doesn't address any of them. Right? Or a workout plan, and you can say that, well, working out can help with stress and all of that, and I'm a big fan of that, but it really doesn't directly address these issues that are so big in so many people's lives. And that is why food is so complicated. It is not that people are lazy or undisciplined or not motivated. It's that it's complicated. And that's really important to understand if you want to get anywhere in a lasting way.
Yeah, those are some really great points. I think I missed one of the spokes. I got emotions, stress, too busy, and avoidance. What was the fifth one?
Exhaustion.
Exhaustion.
Yes.
So
that ties it all together really well, doesn't it?
yeah. I feel like we could talk about each one of those spokes for a minute because I mean the too busy, the avoidance, every single one of them is definitely a factor.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I don't even know which one I would put on top because they all really make sense. Is there a particular one you want to start with and tell us a little bit more?
Well, you know, they all, first of all, they all work together. And one of the things that I have on my website when people come to my website is we actually have a quiz. It's called the Hidden Hungers Quiz, where you can take the quiz and you can find out where you are on these issues and what your hidden hungers are. And but the most important thing is, and we used to do the quiz a different way than we do it now. What we do right now is you'll find out your top hidden hunger, because that really is the place to get started. But what used to happen, and the reason I'm explaining this to you, is that people would take the quiz and they'd be like, oh, I'm high on all of these things. Now I feel like I have more problems than I did before I started. And I want to make it clear, if you're looking at what you just wrote down and thinking, oh, I have all these things, that's really common, because every single one of them either contributes to the others or it diminishes your ability to be effective with those things. And so they do come together, and that's another reason that they can feel so overwhelming, and it can feel impossible to think, well, where do I even start? Which is another reason people say, well, oh, just forget this. I'm just going to pick a food plan.
And get more exhausted from all the work.
But the truth is, two things. If you only choose a new way of eating and you don't address these things and they're going on in your life, these are always going to be there moving around in the background. And no matter how exquisite your food plan is, this stuff is always going to be pulling you back to cravings and urges for food, because food is helping you deal with these things, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, please, please, please don't get overwhelmed if you feel like all of these things are issues for you, because just like they all contribute to each other and they all worsen each other, you can start to make an inroad. Just taking simple steps with one of these things can start to reverse the whole cycle. And so getting clear on, okay, what are the biggest challenges I have, and where can I start to make the most impact is so important, which is why we have the quiz. That's why we've got that set up. But what would you, so you want to talk about these individually. Ask me a question. What would you like to know?
Well, if I had to pick without taking the quiz, if I had to pick, I think I would have, oh, it's still really hard, but I feel like avoidance is a big one for me. And I almost put it in a box with what I've discovered too, is that I feel like I have a perfectionism that I didn't know about, an underlying, and not wanting to be a beginner, because I think a lot of high performing women and professional women, they also are not used to being new at something. So I don't know if that's something you found, or I'm just curious.
Absolutely. I think we're used to, and I put myself in that box too. We're used to being able to know the answer, right? We're used to being able to figure things out. So, and that's one of the reasons that avoidance can happen, because not only are we used to being able to figure things out, but high performers are really good, and again, I'm talking about myself, at creating a world where we don't necessarily have to deal with our weaknesses. And nobody knows it, because we're also really good at talking around, making it look like we have everything going on, got it all figured out, and that's not helpful, which is can also lead to feeling isolated and alone when you're struggling with things, particularly with food, right?
Yeah.
So avoidance, and again, it overlaps with these others. We can avoid for different reasons. We can avoid because we don't like not knowing, or we have this story that we don't know what to do. For instance, let's say you're an emotional eater and you don't really know what to do with the emotions other than eat or stuff them. But there may also be this story you tell yourself that you should know. You should know, or everybody else knows, or this ought to be easy, or another story that I hear from people a lot is, well, I shouldn't feel that way. It's not that I need more tools to deal with anger. I shouldn't feel angry, or I shouldn't get rattled by these difficult people that I work with. I should be different. And shoulds will get us into so much trouble, which is where the perfectionism starts to come in, right? Because perfectionism is all about shoulds and how things should be. And boy, we could talk for an hour about perfectionism.
I never knew I had it, because my house is certainly not clean enough to be considered a perfectionist, but I've found out all kinds of things around that are really interesting. So, because it doesn't always show up the way people think it does. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, I can't be a perfectionist because I'm not perfect.
That's what I'm going to avoid. Yeah. I feel like they're very related, avoidance and perfectionism.
Absolutely. Avoidance, and what happens a lot with eating is, so perfectionism, if you have a hard time, if you're somebody who's listening and you have a hard time relating to the idea of being a perfectionist, and again, one of the reasons that happens is because nobody ever thinks they're perfect enough to be a perfectionist. But black and white thinking is another way to describe perfectionism, or all or nothing thinking. And the way that shows up hugely when it comes to overeating and emotional eating is this whole idea of, well, now I blew it, right? So you set up a plan for yourself, or you set up this list of intentions, and oftentimes it's too big, or it's very, very rigid, and life happens, or you happen, or your plan had some flaws and it doesn't go the way you thought it would go, and well, now I blew it. Now it's all ruined. Now we have to start over on Monday, right? And since I have to start over, I might as well finish the chips, or I might as well. I really wish we had some research on, because I've talked about this with lots and lots of clients and people in my programs. How much of the overeating do you do between the time you decide you blew it and whenever that starting over place is, right? In that gap, there is so much overeating that happens. There is so much emotional beating ourselves up that happens. There's so much overwhelm and stress that's created, and so much hope that gets eroded. Perfectionism is really hard.
Yeah, I've just recently, it's amazing that sometimes things take 43 years to figure out in your life, but because I would have never put myself in that category, but I've just been having a lot of realizations, and it's come from me finally wanting to deal with the emotional eating that I and I didn't even realize that's what it was.
Hmm.
So, and the stress. And so I guess if you could pick one that you feel like almost like more people have on top, is there, I mean, stress seems like a given, but too busy could be up there too. What do you feel like the top issue that you see, or is it pretty equal?
Well, I don't think there is one. And actually what the people who come to our website and take the quiz, it gets pretty evenly distributed. Um, people, and there are, so let's see, let me think that through. We see a pretty even amount. I see a lot of emotional eating from people who are taking the quiz. I will tell you, in terms of if you had two that were equally high, addressing exhaustion is always going to be the very first step, because for so many reasons. And I don't know if you have anybody on your event talking about sleep and exhaustion and overeating. Is that something that you're going to be covering?
No, but maybe we will.
Well, let me tell you.
Still talk to people.
And this is because I work with busy, high achieving people who often tend to pride themselves on cutting sleep
Mhm.
because something has to go and I can
Yeah.
function without sleep. The research is really clear that we can't. The
Mhm.
research is really clear that if you're not getting adequate sleep, your brain changes, your chemistry changes. You are literally more hungry because of the chemical changes in your body. You literally have more cravings, as you know, for sugars, for fattening foods, and not only that, but people who are chronically, well, women for sure, and I don't know the research is that it's as strong for men, but women who are sleep deprived chronically, way more than women who are not, even when you control for calories.
Wow.
So yeah, if exhaustion, the sweetest thing that you can do for yourself right now, if you are struggling with overeating and you are somebody who does not routinely get 7.5 hours of sleep a night, is to start working on that. It is the easiest bang for your buck you will ever get. And I know it's not always easy to make yourself get more sleep. Um, and there are a number of reasons for that too, but it feels so good. It's the easiest thing I mean, it's easy, go to sleep.
Yeah. It can be easy.
Right,
You
once
brought
you're
up a
once
really
you're
good
there, yeah.
point too, that from a nursing side, that some people could have undiagnosed sleep apnea too. Like you
Exactly.
might be thinking that you're sleeping 8, 10 hours, but you're really not getting very good rest. So I think that the viewer should probably keep that in mind too, and maybe that's something that if you're snoring or like really heavily snoring, to go get checked out.
Or
So
if you've been told that a lots of people dread sleep studies, but I'm telling you, thank you for bringing that up, because sleep apnea, getting a sleep disorder diagnosed is a game changer. And if it's going on and you don't have it addressed, everything else you're going to be doing, it's like, and that's one of the reasons I start with exhaustion. If my clients are chronically exhausted, that's the first thing we do, because there's all sorts of other nifty things that we can do, and helpful strategies and tricks and all that kind of stuff, but everything you try to do is going to feel like you are rolling a boulder uphill. And if you can take that away, if you can take that struggle away from the very beginning, everything else is going to be so much less of a struggle.
yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And because lack of sleep, I see, I work on a locked psychiatric unit, and when I'm there, we sometimes have people who, that's the only reason they're experiencing psychosis because they didn't sleep, and they're not even using drugs or anything. Like sometimes just, something happened, but sleep is very important. And I am glad that you brought that up, because it wasn't something that I had really connected to food as much as I had connected it to other issues. So
Mhm.
that's a great point. So the other thing I really wanted to ask is that you talk about how willpower is not the issue, and I see all these like motivational books and goal setting, and some people are really into that, and then they really beat themselves up because they still didn't you know do the plan or whatever. And I've been learning a little bit about willpower myself and how, we only have so much. It's not an unlimited supply. So can you tell us a little bit about why willpower doesn't really have a lot to do with this?
Well, you gave a big part of the answer, which is that there is always a limit. And again, I work with people who have tremendous amounts of willpower, and they just do things, and so they're used to relying on that. And that's great. It can be a strength. Having a lot of self-discipline is a wonderful thing. But what you need to know, a couple things. You are going to be in your relationship with food for the rest of your life. It's not going away, right? So what you need is a solution that is really going to last. And every single one of us has a limit to our willpower. I mean, we're going to hit it. And when you think about go back to what you wrote down, those exhaustion, the emotions, the being too busy, the stress, the avoidance, when that stuff is hitting the hardest, and let's just assume that those things trigger overeating for you, those are also all things that call on and deplete your willpower. So what happens is if we are relying on willpower to do the things we want to do with food, we're kind of setting ourselves up to have the least of it when we need it the most. And so that's the one thing. The second thing is it's no fun. Again, you're going to be in this relationship with food forever. Who wants to wake up every morning? And I have worked with people who have spent years waking up every morning thinking, okay, this is what I have to do. This is what I will eat. This is what I'm going to do at that restaurant. This is, what is the number on the scale going to be today? Talk about stress. It's not a recipe for happiness or ease or joy or peacefulness with food, which is what I teach. So I do not recommend it. I think there's a much better approach. You want to talk about that?
Sure. I would love to know what your approach is.
So I guess I think a lot in cycles, and maybe it's being a psychologist and working with people and knowing that everything kind of connects to everything else. So I gave you one cycle. We've got that negative hamster wheel cycle. So let's draw another one. So do another circle, and I think there are 5 spokes. Yeah, do 5 more spokes.
Okay.
And so what if you had a different cycle? Instead of exhaustion and emotions and stress and avoidance and all that stuff, what if you had one and the first spoke was getting your needs met?
Okay.
And if the next spoke was tools and strategies for emotions. So emotions weren't like, oh, I can't deal with one more thing. You could flow with that. And what if another spoke was tackling guilt and self-blame, so that it wasn't such either a showstopper, which it is for a lot of people, or it's a recipe for walking into the kitchen and opening the refrigerator, or it is the guilt and self-blame is so demotivating that it feels like you can't even get started because you don't believe in yourself anymore. And then what if you had a spoke that was knowing, this is so big, knowing what to do instead? See, so much when people try to change their relationship with food, so much of it tends to be negatives. It's willpower. It's like, okay, I will not do this. I will not eat after 7 o'clock at night. I will not go down the cookie aisle. I will not. Okay, so what are you going to do instead? If you're a comfort eater or a stress eater, or like so many women I work with, if you struggle with overeating at the end of the day, it's really great to decide, I'm not going to do that anymore. But if you go back to that first hamster wheel, there are a lot of reasons you're doing it. So what are you going to do instead? So important. So that's one of the big things I hope people take away from this, that becomes so much easier when you have an instead plan. And then the last thing that I think is really important if you want to build a different cycle is making, let's just call it doable steps. Which again goes back to perfectionism, because we put together these plans that don't respect our lives. And so a lot of people sat down in the last week in December and the first week in January and came up with these plans that were every single day and 7 days a week, and I'm not going to eat any of this. And they're probably exhausted just writing it down. They were probably hoping they would have a ton of willpower to get through it. And right about now, they're they may
That's a
be
lot of willpower, if you ask me, to get 2 weeks.
yeah. So keeping it doable, right? It's just like you can reverse negative cycles with teeny tiny changes. All you got to do is start doing one thing differently. So if you can start to think in ways like that, like really taking care of these original hidden hungers and really giving yourself what you need to be successful, that puts you on such a different path than the whole willpower, just do it, get it done, be tough kind of journey that, you're right, lasts about 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people, I mean, honestly, years ago, I don't really do resolutions anymore just because, once you've been on the planet enough years, you start to realize that I don't find it a very effective strategy. And I don't know that many people that are, it just would, I started to think it was just a reason to beat myself up after a couple of weeks. So the way I like to do things now and what I'm moving into is that, like you said, having a plan and focusing on what I get to do instead of focusing on the rules. And because I've found that I don't like rules. That's, something about myself I've discovered that if you give me a rule, all I want to do is break it. So, and it's fun to have this self-discovery kind of process that it's just like, okay, well, I need to find what does work. And having a plan sounds like, how do you, tell me about the plan? How rigid should the plan be? Do you have some examples to talk about, or does it vary from person to person?
It's totally individual. And I love what you were just saying about, that kind of, don't tell me what to do or I'll push back. We all have really different relationships with the change process and with rules. And first of all, I think with food, rules can be, you got to be really careful with them. Some people really like we're all different. And here's the place to start. You have lived inside your body your entire life. You know yourself better than anyone. You might be confused about some things. You might have gotten tangled up with listening to hundreds of other people or all the emails in your inbox, or, and not be clear on your own voice anymore and what you know. But you know yourself better than anybody. And I have been doing this work since, depending on where you start counting, we can go back to 1989. There is no cookie cutter answer to this. There is no one thing that works for anybody. And starting with what you know and listening to yourself and knowing that, okay, a bunch of rules are going to send me in the opposite direction, that is so important. So that's the very first place is starting with listening to yourself and making sure that there is enough space in your busy, crazy life to hear yourself and to stop and ask yourself. I mean, how many people who are listening right now, when's the last time you actually stopped and thought about, what am I feeling? Or what do I need today? Or even, am I hungry? I mean, how much of your eating, if you think about it, happens on autopilot? You do it because it's there, or because it's your lunch break, or because you always have that bowl of ice cream when you're watching TV, or but we just, so connecting to yourself, paying attention to what you know about yourself, and then really feeding yourself what you really need. And I'm not talking about food. So if you're exhausted and your hidden hunger is one of really needing some rest, how can you start to feed yourself that? If you really need some tools and strategies for coping with emotions, how can you start to grow those? So it's a very individual recipe, but it's so different than so many people expect. They think they're going to get a formula for how many carbs and how often do I weigh myself?
Yeah, Well, I think that is a really, really important topic to bring up because um, nourishment is definitely not just from food. And that's what, I think that a lot of us know that yet we don't really do anything to nourish ourselves and our lives because of all the other spokes, like you were talking about, the stress, the
Mhm.
exhaustion, you know, they're too busy. And so, I'm really finding that that does need to be a priority. And is that something that you talk about in your work too? Is that prioritizing yourself in that way? And
Absolutely. Um, Absolutely. And if you go back and you look at that vicious cycle there of, all of those things, they're all reasons that they all become excuses for not taking good care of ourselves and sliding ourselves off of our priority list. But every single one of those things gets better when we do nourish ourselves. And again, there isn't one way to do that. You can't take a class in the 5 steps to nourishing myself, because what nourishes you might be really, boring or irritating to the next person, and what just feeds their soul is not your cup of tea, right? So
sure.
and again, you've lived inside your body longer than anybody, so starting to pay attention to that. And by the way, these are things that on the surface sound really simple, right? Um, Take better care of yourself, nourish yourself, give yourself what you need. I will tell you that because people tend to think that they feel bad because they don't know how to do this, I will tell you that it is extremely common not to have a clue how to do this.
Oh yeah.
And not to have a, ding, 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 oh, this is what I
Yeah.
need, this is what that means. It's
Yeah.
really, really hard because you're not used to thinking in that way,
Yeah.
right?
I find that it's sometimes easy for people to make a list, but then to actually do things to take care of themselves. I mean, I think there's a spectrum too. Like I said, I work in a psychiatric hospital with people who are really struggling with all kinds of issues. And, sometimes at that point in their lives, they can't even recognize something that they would put on a list. Like, oh, do I like to go for a walk, or do I, what they don't even they can't quite even recognize something that they would enjoy because there's literally no enjoyment in their lives. And then we move up the spectrum to, I could make a long list of all the things I would enjoy, but then how do I, why isn't it that easy for me to go out and do them? And so I think then it comes to dealing with all
Oh,
the
can I ask
emotions.
you? Okay, can I ask you, what do you know about why it isn't easy? Is it?
Oh, I know it isn't easy because it hasn't been easy for me. I mean, I've made, I used to call myself the list maker, and my husband would
Mhm.
make fun of me because and I don't do it anymore because it was an obsession, but back, it was previously when I owned a business, and I would, with the list check off, and I had all these ideal lists of my ideal life and my ideal self, and if I was doing this, and I don't do the list anymore because to me, doing the list all the time like that obsessively was not serving me.
Mhm.
But I'm not saying it's not good to have a little list, but redoing it every day. um, but it was just the transition from knowing what I wanted and knowing what my values were into integrating and embodying those values into my life. And that's what I'm doing right now. I mean, that's why I'm doing this summit. That's why I want to share this with the world, because I know that this is like a stuck point that a lot of people have.
Yeah.
And so, I'm not sure what it was. It could be shame. It could be because I didn't feel like I deserved it. Could be because I just avoided it. I mean, I've been through years of therapy. I've done, I'm very comfortable with talking about my issues. So, but it's that point of how do I move from knowing what my values are into being the embodiment of my values. And for me, that was a different way of eating. And it was taking care of myself and nourishing myself. And by doing things, maybe it's not going to be yoga for everybody. Maybe it's not going to be meditation for everybody. Maybe for some people it's a walk in nature, or, um, you know, for some people, it might even be cleaning their house. I don't know.
Well, and I think what you're saying is so important because if you're starting with something, I always think in terms of muscles, right? And so if self-care is a muscle that is just not developed for you, or it's really weak right now, you're not going to go across the room and pick up a 100-pound barbell and hoist it above your head with one arm. You're just not going to do that. It's not going to go well. But you can start really small, like, go make a cup of tea. I have become quite a tea drinker, and I think it's because, man, you get so much. This is actually water, but you can sit, you can hold something that smells really good. It's warm. It feels, it gives you taste and smell and touch. So you can do a little thing like make a cup of tea or put on some lovely lotion, or like you're saying, just step outside for a minute and take a few deep breaths. But starting in little ways, which also helps connect you to yourself. And there's just this whole, you can start to unlock a new cycle by doing, again, the small doable steps. High achievers are so good at, like, I'll say, we'll talk about taking better care of yourself, and I've worked with people who could rattle off 5 pages of things they should be doing, right? If I was taking care of myself, I would, and then it feels like, it just feels awful and it's overwhelming. And no, what could you do in the next, and anybody listening, I want you to think about this when you are done listening today. What could you do within 60 seconds of getting off the computer or however you're listening? What could you do for yourself that it might take 30 seconds?
Mm-hmm.
It might just be closing your eyes and taking 5 deep breaths, or taking time to go refill your water glass. Or do you know that putting your hand on your heart and feeling your heartbeat has been shown, it's been proven to reduce stress. So, just 30 seconds, or listen to a song that you have uploaded on your phone. But you can start with self-care, which, what we usually do? A lot of smart, busy women, they get off something like this. They're not sure what to do next. They don't stop to check in with themselves. They don't stop to take a deep breath. What many people often do is they wander to the break room or to the refrigerator or and they just grab something to eat, because that's what you do in between things. And if I've just described your pattern, you are so not alone. and so what we're talking about is feeding yourself in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense the way I said that?
Oh, all of this is so powerful, and I think it's going to be very meaningful for a lot of people listening, because I think a lot of women don't know there's other women like them in this area, because this isn't something we really talk about. And and when you said that, the little thing, like the tea, my husband used to make fun of me. Another thing, I have like collections of tea, of tins of tea and all these tea. And I just said, I want to be a person who drinks tea. And then I would just be sitting there with my cup of coffee all day. And it's like, this is the things I did to myself, because I had this box of values. And then it was like, this is the reality, here I am with my Starbucks. And it's like, the tea's just like, I don't even know if it's expired, And so it's like, it's not always that easy to do little acts of self-care. And it's a discovery process. I just found out that there's yoga teachers that only do 10 minutes of yoga in the morning. And in my mind, I thought, if I want to do that for myself, I have to wake up and have 90 minutes, and I have to have Lululemon, and I have to, or otherwise it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
And so it's like
perfectionism. Right?
Yeah. And but when I found that out, I was so shocked that I've talked about it more than once in this. That I was like, "What? You're a yoga teacher? You only do 10 minutes or 15 minutes in the morning?" I'm sure she does more sometimes, but she said that was her morning routine, and it opened up a whole world for me, because I was like, "Oh, so I could just do 5 or 10 minutes, and there's actually a benefit." Mm-hmm. And I've been doing it, and there has been. And so I think the little steps, like I've always, because the all or nothing, like you were saying earlier, people have the black or white, the all or nothing, the throw in the towel because I ate the pizza. And it's like, it doesn't seem like worthwhile when you have that attitude to do just a little thing, but it really is. And that's finding.
So many people email me, and that is exactly what they said, that I cannot believe how powerful the small changes that I have made have been. Which just makes me so happy because and to go back to, if you are somebody who's struggling with overeating or emotional eating, I am willing to bet that you're not looking for a 6-week solution, and you've probably had a 6-week solution, and you may be very tired of having found the 6-week solution, and that, here we go again, right? Feeling like you're on another hamster wheel with this stuff. If you're looking for something that's going to last forever, you probably don't have a lot of space in your life for big, giant, heavy, hard changes that you're going to have to keep moving for the next, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. So that when we can find these sweet little things that not only take the power away from food, because they really do, and we haven't talked a lot about that, but when you start to feed yourself what you're really hungry for, when you start to take care of these hidden hungers, it is amazing the power that it's like the food just deflates. Cravings really do. People talk, people chase this idea of how can I lose my cravings? Well, that is how you lose your cravings. I have seen it happen over and over and over again, where people just stop doing stuff that they were haunted by, that they thought was going to be a part of their life forever, and food just doesn't call to them anymore the way it used to, because they found something that works way better.
That's amazing. I'm so glad that we talked about this, because I think this is so important, that like nourishing ourselves in other ways besides just food. And I think it's something that needs to be talked about for sure. And so I have just one more question about something that just keeps popping up in my mind.
Uh-huh.
And that is, it's because I'm thinking about like self-punishment. And because like I know massage therapists who never go get a massage, or or estheticians who've never had a facial, or nurses who have a hard time taking care of themselves, but they take care of others all day. Moms who they're taking care of all these babies, and so to me that's like I call it passive aggressive self punishment, but and they don't, because sometimes I don't think they realize that's what they're doing. And this is something that I've realized about myself, because I've had like gift certificates for massage and I never went and got it. It's like, why would I do that? I realized, why would I do that? That's punishment. And so I'm just curious if if just anything that you have to speak to about that, and then also I think you have a free gift for everybody that's viewing, and then you can just tell us a little bit about that.
I do. Well, I think there are two sides to it. I think that the good news is, a lot of people that I see who really struggle with this whole issue of making time for themselves, or taking care of themselves, or paying attention to themselves, or giving themselves enough support, for instance, to learn how to do this differently. They see that and they feel really frustrated with themselves. And yet a lot of these people are the most caring, giving, nurturing people you could meet. So the good news is, if you are one of these people, you already have the skill set, right? It's not like you have to go figure out how to invent a wheel and you don't even know what a wheel is. You already know how to be kind and compassionate and nurturing and caring. The problem is, it's like a searchlight and you've got it all focused over here, and we just need to help you figure out how to move yourself into the light, right? It's not like anybody else loses out, but if you can step into the light too and get some of that goodness that you're giving everybody else, it's a small thing. It's something that can be really hard to do on your own, because it's hard we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know how to do things it's like if I decided I wanted to speak Swahili, I couldn't just use willpower to figure out how to do it, right? And so figuring out how to step into that light is something that's one of the big places that I think support or coaching can be really helpful. There was another thing I was going to say about that. I think it's a process. And for people who really feel like, again, I think we have stories that we tell ourselves. So it's selfish, or I shouldn't need it, or everything else needs to get done first. It really is a low item on the priority list. And so really taking a look at the stories that you're telling yourself, and asking yourself how those are working, you know. And because I think what happens is we get into this whole thing about, well, but I do believe it, or I think it's kind of true, and so how can I just abandon it? Well, okay, so maybe there's lots of things that are true that I don't put a lot of energy into thinking about every day. And so you may have a story that you are pretty convinced it's true. Let's not get into arguing about that. Is it serving you? And is there something else that's true that might serve you better? Right? So, maybe you really have some compelling reasons that saving those spa certificates for a rainy day is really, lots of people do. Okay, but how is it serving you? And is there something that you could tell yourself instead of saying, I'm not going to do that anymore? Okay, so what could you tell yourself instead that might help you move in the direction that you want to better? And I feel like that's a vague answer.
No, that's great. I mean, what could I tell myself? Well, that I deserve this massage, and and let's fit it in because it's going to expire. Then I'll feel guilty using it. In California, you can use expired gift certificates, but
Ooh.
It feels a little rude. I know this is from 10 years ago.
But what are the benefits I'll get? Like, I don't have time for that. Okay, first of all, we all have the same amount of time. So you do have time. I'm choosing not to take the time to do that. And what would be the benefit of taking the time? What if I did take the time? You can start to play with our thinking. Our thinking can be so rigid.
Yeah. Can you tell us just real quick a little bit about what you do in therapy to support people as a therapist?
Well, I don't work as a therapist any longer. I was a therapist in private practice for a very long time, but I use my psychology now. I have an online community called Too Much on Her Plate, toomuchonherplate.com, and I have a couple online programs that are specifically about the two in particular. One is really about building new habits over the long term, and one which is called Your Missing Piece, PEACE, is really about a lot of what we talked about, but it's a 6-week program for getting to the root of emotional eating and creating a formula for freedom from overeating. So those are the two programs. I also do private coaching. But I also love to share resources. There are a number of free resources and classes on the website. The quiz. If you haven't, it's to the heart of all of this, and that's at toomuchonherplate.com. But I did put together a gift for people today. Do you want? Is this?
Okay, can you tell us about it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's called I have my notes over here because I want to make sure I tell you what it is. So we call it the Success Pack for Smart Busy Women. And what I did is I pulled together 3 things that are really helpful. We've got a comfort eating strategy guide, which is not your usual comfort eating strategy guide, but it's really about how to break the comfort eating habit, which is, we didn't talk about comfort eating, but we kind of talked around it today. It's a big part of this. How to declutter your brain and lose 10 pounds of stress. Again, like how can we change our thinking? How can we take care of ourselves differently to move forward? And then I've got an emotional eating strategy guide for you, 10 strategies to avoid emotional eating, which is just more along the lines of what I've been talking about. It's the flavor that you've been getting from me today. So if that feels helpful, I think these are some resources that can kind of help you take the next step.
Yeah, that's very generous. Those are some amazing free gifts. And the comfort thing, I know that there's a few other people I've talked to about that too, the feelings of discomfort. And so I think everything we talked about today was so amazing. So I think they'll get benefit from getting that free gift from you as well. And I feel like we covered a lot of stuff that was really important. So I think it's okay. How do you feel?
I think this has been really fun. Thank you for putting on this event, and you're right. We talked about a lot of stuff, but but this is the stuff that drives overeating and emotional eating, particularly for women, particularly for busy women. It is a lot of stuff, and it can be. I always think of it like swirling around, right? It can feel like that, and it can feel like it's hard to hold on to. And so, where do I even start? And so, I hope what we talked about today was helpful in terms of how to understand that there's a lot there. It's not that you're lazy or you're not motivated. It can be complicated, and there's a way to make it simpler. And it starts with hidden hungers and feeding your hidden hungers in doable ways.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. McCreary, and I look forward to implementing a lot of the stuff I've learned from you today, and I think I think all these viewers are going to get a lot of value out of this. So thanks for watching, guys.